Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk with Lisa and Layne. Hi Layne.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
So friends, we are so glad to come to you today. Let's see, what month is this? This is February. So this will be airing probably at the beginning of March, which is like high cotton and seed starting time. So we're super excited. And so Layne, what kind of seeds are you starting right now? I know people are really curious to know that.
I have a lot of different things going. So I have some different vegetable seeds. I brought some little lettuce seedlings to show you all. Look
How
pretty they
beautiful.
are. Aren't they pretty? I have a lot of perennials going, like I mentioned before. So I'm growing some things like Asclepias, Echinops, Echinacea, Eryngium, Lady's Mantle, Monkshood. I also have a lot of strawflower going, verbascum, successions of feverfew and foxgloves. I have about 2,000 seedlings going right now, just inside and not outside. So there's a lot.
So friends, we'll just call her an avid home gardener. There's got to be a better word for you, Layne. So, so for us here on the farm, the 1st of March, we are like getting ready to launch into heavy warm season tender annuals. And I just can't even believe that it's that time of the year. And we'll also be doing, we always push the limits on our sunflower seed starting. So the 1st of March, we start starting not a bunch, but we start some on the event that they make it through and it's an early year. And so it's kind of like it makes you a little giddy, doesn't it? When it's all these
Yes.
babies and we have
Yes.
vegetables going too. I have broccoli and kale and lettuce
Yep.
and chives and peas and beets. And oh my goodness, your lettuce looked good enough to eat. And friends, with that said, did you know that if you're listening to this on a podcast, if you were on YouTube right now, Layne is holding up the most beautiful tray of leaf lettuce baby plants. She's petting them. I'd be pinching them and eating them. So friends, we're so glad that you guys have joined us here today. And, this podcast is brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com, which is what keeps Layne and I busy during the day. Layne is the seed manager. I don't know what I am. I'm the paper pusher, head bottle washer, I guess you would say over there. So Layne, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about a topic that we've gotten a lot of requests for, and that is hardening off. So we're going to be talking about what hardening off is, why it's so important, a few different ways you can accomplish it, and some possible exceptions, some scenarios where you might be able to get away with not hardening off depending on the time of year and the setup. So are you ready to get started?
I am ready to roll.
All right. So first up, I wanted to start by describing what growing conditions are like indoors for our seedlings.
Sure. So Layne has a beautiful picture of one of our shelving units with our grow lights on it and trays of soil blocks. And so this is a 10 by 10 room that is a part of our big workshop, which is basically just a giant garage, y'all. It's heated and air conditioned. So it is conditioned. And this 10 by 10 room has a door. So I can kind of leave the door open if we want to cool it off or close it if it gets a little bit warmer. So the lights in this room can actually contribute a little bit to the temperature in there, as well as our seedling heat mats are in the same room. And you may not be able to tell from the picture if you're actually watching the video of this. There are big windows behind my grow racks, and they've got shades on them. That's what you're seeing, or some of those bamboo type shades that block the brightest light. The light really does not contribute to growing our plants, but it does warm the room up significantly. And that's why I mentioned that our room has a door on it. If I close the door and it's a sunny day, it can quickly climb to 95 to 100 degrees in there. My goal temperatures or conditions in there when we are growing warm season tender annuals, which is what we're heading into now, right? We want that room to be 75 to 85 degrees. It's almost always at the top of that when the sun is bright. when we're growing cool season hardy annuals, it's more like 65 to 70 degrees. And again, I can kind of contribute that to leaving the door open. Our big room, which is heated and air conditioned, we typically keep, I'm looking, it's at 66 degrees in here. So if we need to cool the room down, we just open the door and let it aerate some. And so we have grow lights, a seedling heat mat, and those are our air temperatures.
Yeah. And indoors in the environment like Lisa just described, there are controlled temperatures. There's not much fluctuation in the temperatures. These seedlings are not really having to contend with wind. Some people do use fans to try to mimic the effect of a gentle breeze, but they're still not having to deal with gusts of wind. There's not really any direct sun. Like Lisa mentioned, sometimes there can be sunlight coming through a window, but it's not an intense direct sun. There's not really many insects or creatures or pests to deal with, maybe some fungus gnats, but it's a really sheltered, protected, controlled environment with optimal conditions for growth, which is the point. We want these seedlings to grow up quickly so we can get them outside where they really want to be.
That's a good point, Layne. And also, I want to say people often ask me, like, why do your seedlings grow so fast? I believe not only are the conditions, I mean, how you water them, what you're growing them in, and those kind of conditions, but I think that air temperature, warm plants need warmth for vegetative growth, right? So if you've got a cool condition, that you might be able to get away with cool season hardy annuals. They'll be slow growers. You might be able to get them to grow, but warm season will just put on the brakes and sit there.
Oh, yeah. So now let's talk about what the conditions are like outdoors. So let's just say it's a summer day. What are the conditions like just in the middle of your field, Lisa?
So what a beautiful picture. One of my favorites. I actually have a big picture of this framed in my house. I have this.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really beautiful.
Nice.
So the conditions out in our field, we have a really windy spot. And it's even though, up until just a few years ago, it was open pastures next to us, which means a lot of rolling wind. I mean, you'll get really big gusts. That has not seemed to stop, even though we have houses built around us now. I mean, I thought that was one good thing. I could look forward to those houses being there, right? Big wind blocks, but we still have the wind. So we have wind, we get a lot of torrential rain here. And of course, we're in southeastern Virginia. So in the summertime, our outdoor growing conditions can be hot and humid, meaning like 95, 98, 100 degrees is not always, but we definitely hit it in the summertime. So that's kind of what it's like here in the heat of summer for sure.
Yeah. Outdoors, there are just a lot of conditions that these seedlings are not going to be used to. There's intense direct sunlight that they've never experienced. Yep. There are breezes right up to gusts of wind, temperature fluctuations, and often more extreme temperatures than they've experienced up to that point. And also there might be various creatures that are trying to eat them.
Yeah, I was thinking I didn't even mention all the rabbits and yeah.
So to bridge the gap between the indoor conditions and the outdoor conditions, this is why it's important to do what's called hardening off. So Lisa, what is hardening off and why is it so important?
Yeah, it just doesn't seem very important when you're standing there with a tray of seedlings that looks so nice and sturdy and healthy, and you're thinking, well, why don't I just go plant them right straight out in the garden? It's like they look so dadgum good, right? And then you go and plant them and you come back at the end of the day and they're just laying over on their side. They aren't just wilted, they are shriveled because they just were not prepared for that intense sun. And for us, that constant ground level wind that seems to be present. So hardening off is the word you just used is kind of perfect. It's a bridge. It's like helping them walk slowly across that bridge and getting acclimated to the outdoor conditions. And I just can't tell you that I know we've spoke of this in the past, taking the time to really create an area where you can safely and feel good about a spot that you can just take your seedlings out to be hardened off is so well worth it.
Yep. So hardening off is just the process of acclimating these seedlings that were grown indoors under these optimal conditions that we just described to the outdoor conditions and stresses like direct sunlight, breezes, wind, more extreme temperatures and temperature fluctuations, and also the way that these new conditions affect their water supply. So something like the sun beating down on them and the wind blowing on them, even just a breeze, that can cause their water supply to dwindle more than it did, more than they're used to when it's indoors.
Yeah.
And when your plants are hardening off, they're actually growing and developing in a bunch of different ways that are going to help them survive these new conditions. So the waxy cuticle layer that's on their foliage starts to thicken. This protects them from a variety of things, and it also helps to reduce the amount of water that's actually lost through their leaves. The plant tissues literally start to toughen up, and that stem gets stronger, which makes it less likely that it's going to just snap in the wind. The plants are storing up carbohydrates. They're building up their food reserves. There are pigments that the plants are producing that protect against a variety of environmental stressors. And these are just some examples. There's a lot more than that even going on. But the point is, your plants are doing a lot to build up their defenses and toughen up to protect themselves when they're out there hardening off.
You know, Layne, I also, one thing that I do when I harden off that I don't remember mentioning it before is I start not cuddling them quite so much as I used to.
Yes.
For instance, watering them. You know, it's like I let them they get drier naturally because of the wind and the temperature outside. And that's, you know, like if I walk by in the afternoon and notice that they're looking a little dry, I don't stop and water them. That's part of
Yes.
toughening them up a little bit, you know.
It is.
I might even slow down their fertilization a little bit. And so, yeah, that's really good to know.
And just like you said, that's what kind of causes them to realize, I better do something about this. Life isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Exactly.
And also something else I wanted to point out is hardening off doesn't just apply to seedlings that you've grown indoors. It can also apply to plugs that you might have ordered that perhaps were grown in a greenhouse, or even if you pick up some tomatoes or peppers at the nursery and they had been grown in a greenhouse setting, those may also be things you need to harden off.
That's really true. We just got our Lysianthus plugs. And when we get them, they are fresh out of a greenhouse, put in a box and shipped to us. And it's amazing how beautiful they are when you take them out. But I generally like for them to sit on my carport for at least a week to 10 days. And longer if they're smaller than I like. But yes, that's so true.
All right. So what are the consequences of not hardening off?
Dead plants. So, I mean, there's just so many different things that can affect them. But for us, particularly, I think of warm season. Warm season, heat is much harder on warm season transplants than cold is to cool season transplants, meaning the conditions that you should be planting your plant into for that time of the year. Of those two, warm heat will really toast a transplant in literally no time at all. When they are not acclimated to that intense heat, or for us, you know, I'll mention again, it's that constant ripple of wind that's at ground level that you really don't notice that's even there until you use a row cover once. And I can remember when I first kind of figured this out many years ago, I would stand at my living room window after I would plant and just kind of like gaze out at the garden, right? And it's like, gosh, that was back before I used so many hoops. I would lay the row cover directly on the transplants, the lightweight row cover for a temporary use. And that row cover is constantly just bellowing just a little bit. And that just reveals how much wind there is at ground level that you may not be thinking there's wind out there.
Yeah. So best case scenario, they might struggle. Worst case scenario, your seedlings could actually die, unfortunately.
And that could happen within 24 hours. I mean, sometimes if you plant in the morning and they are not properly hardened off to warm to the heat, they'll be gone by 5 o'clock here where we are. If it climbs to 85 or 90 degrees, and it doesn't matter what you plant them into. That is very, very stressful. They need to be acclimated to that.
Yes. Do you have any bad hardening off experiences that you'd
Oh my
like to
gosh.
share?
Oh yeah. So one really, it wasn't, I mean, this was just operator error. This was back when I was first starting to grow and I was just getting into using the grow racks that I have now, which are those stainless steel rolling racks. And I had so many seedlings. I rolled one of the racks outdoors on my carport
Yeah.
so I could let not, so I didn't, I thought I was saving myself time of carrying individual trays, which in reality, that was only 3, 6, 9. That was only 12 trays. That would have been 6 trips, a piece of cake. I pushed that rack outside to harden off, and I was down in the garden planting, and I felt the wind and looked up there. And before I could even get up, the whole hardening off rack of trays went over. I mean,
Oh,
yeah, it was bad. It was ugly. I mean, I was so not thinking about wind that I didn't lock the wheels. I mean, this was like such a naive move, right? But that was a
yeah.
long time ago. I never, ever, ever did that again. Ever, ever.
All
But
right.
I've planted plants that were not hardened off and killed them more times than I can count.
So, when should a seedling be hardened off? What stage of growth do you look for before you move it outside to be hardened off?
So there's the way that we're forced to do it, then there's the optimal way. The way that we're forced most often, I call once we starting seeds here on the farm in January. It doesn't really start happening probably until the 1st of March. January to March, we're starting seeds, but not a heavy load. I call it the seed freight train. When we start in March, we have an endless list of seeds to be started until like November, right? So we will start a ton of seeds and the grow room is full. And then all of a sudden we realize we have plants coming off the seedling heat mat or out of the germination chamber, and we have nowhere for them to go. So that means that we start looking on our shelves and saying, I think you look big enough to move outside. We bump them. But in the optimal goal is to move them outside about 7 to 14 days before they would be ready to plant. That doesn't, like for 7 days, when we're talking about zinnias that are growing in a soil block for 2 to 3 weeks, we would move a zinnia out when it's like a week and a half old to give it that at least a week of good growth and becoming acclimated out there. So it's about a third when they still have a third of their growth to go, because different plants grow at different rates. So if it's sunflowers and you're growing them inside, we typically throw them out onto the porch to grow there. But anything that's a quick grower, 2 to 3 weeks, was what we recommend planting them out. When they're at the oldest, 2 weeks old, they need to be gotten outside to start hardening off.
Yeah.
Longer growth, just look at a third of that time, and it's best to have it growing outdoors in the conditions with some protection.
Yeah. And I do the same thing. I prefer to harden off as soon as I think they're able to be put outside because it clears up grow light space. It saves on my grow light hours as well as energy. And also, I don't have a drain in the floor, which you actually have in your seed room, Lisa, which is very fortunate. So I actually like once they're outside and I can kind of just dump the water from my
Yes.
trays on the ground. However, you do have to be careful of rain filling up your trays
Right.
and destroying your blocks, which we'll talk about. But yeah, and the lettuce that I showed earlier, that actually has been hardening off for about a week. I just brought it back inside as a show and tell, but
It's beautiful. It's
But-
beautiful.
I like to move them out as soon as possible. And with your sunflowers, Lisa, another thing people can do is sprout those indoors on their heat mats. And then once the weather's warmed up a bit, they can move them outside after germinating to continue growing out there.
Right. As long as the early birds that we start, you can't quite do that with. But once the days are warming up and are above, 65 or 70 degrees, because they need heat to grow, right? Yes,
Right.
we just put them out there and they're hardening off just as they grow up. So it's super convenient.
Yeah. And Lisa grows her sunflowers in plug trays, as we've mentioned before. But if you're growing in soil blocks, just remember that rain can damage your blocks or fill up your trays with water if you don't have some sort of overhead protection.
Yes.
And something else to be aware of too is if you're growing a lot of cut flowers, most cut flowers perform best in full sun. But if you're growing other things that might prefer shade or part shade conditions, like I've mentioned, I grow a lot of columbine, they might not want full sun ever.
Right.
So that's something to also be aware of. All right, so now we're going to talk about where you should be hardening these seedlings off. So I wanted to talk about a couple of different ways you could accomplish this. So the first way we're going to talk about, I'm calling the traditional in and out method. So Lisa, can you describe what the in and out method is?
So the in and out method, I compare to getting a puppy.
Yes.
It is never ending. So the in and out means the first day, if you're doing it out in a non-protected area, most likely, meaning, it's kind of out in the open, you would set your seedlings out for a couple hours in the morning, but then you bring them back in to give them that break. Then you might bring them back out maybe later that afternoon, or maybe even you'll wait till the next morning. There is a real chain and ball that goes along with this method. You would never leave home and leave your seedlings sitting out in the open, because if a rainstorm or a big gust of wind or something came, you might lose all your seedlings in one whack. And y'all have to know that the slide we're looking at now are transplants of Layne's on her deck, and they're absolutely beautiful. Is that this year, Layne?
This was last year. I need to take pictures this year too. Yeah.
It's beautiful, very beautiful. But yeah, so this is what some people do. That's why I feel so attached and grateful for this space that I've created, where I can just put stuff out and not worry about it. I can just leave it. Yeah, so that's the in and out. You move it out gradually, longer each day, until you feel like they're acclimated. But if they are not covered, you still are kind of afraid of rainstorms.
Yes, my top concern is rain. And I actually don't do the traditional in and out method. You might be able to see in the slides, but there are a ton of extremely tall trees surrounding our property. So that provides dappled shade on and off throughout the day. So I actually don't have to move mine in and out once I put them out there. However, if it's going to rain, that's when I have an issue, because they're not covered. So the in and out method, again, just involves moving your seedlings out and then back inside under grow lights every day, gradually increasing the amount of time they're spending outside until they're acclimated to outdoor conditions.
Right.
And you don't want to start by putting them out for the first time under harsh midday sun, but something like soft morning light is great. And like Lisa said, you just want to start with a short amount of time outside the first day and then leave them out for a little longer the next day, and so on and so forth. And you gradually build up over a span of around 7 to 10 days to being able to leave your seedlings out all day and all night.
Yeah.
So the in and out method, that's definitely an option if you don't have a space like we're about to describe, but it is more work, or if you're not at home all day, it can be an issue. Also, it can become a hassle if you have a lot of trays, or if your indoor grow room is upstairs. So now we're going to talk about a more hands-off method. And this is leaving it outside, moving it outside, and leaving it outside in a protected, sheltered location. And I've circled on this slide Lisa's carport, which is where her seedlings get hardened off.
And so this view that we're looking at, we're standing in the west. So that would be that gets the afternoon sun there. And so that carport, the other side is in the east. So it's like a really perfect spot to catch the morning sun, then the late afternoon. And when there's high sun, the carport roof covers it. And also, so those trays that you see sitting on the right of this slide, those are at the east end of that carport. And so they actually aren't under the carport portion. I can let them be on the out in the open, because they can take actual rain. So it's just, and that wooden fence that you see there, that was not there probably for the first maybe 2 or 3 years that I had that building, which was built in 2002. And it just took one really windy spring for me to realize that, you know what, we are just going to put, like, those are 4-foot cedar boards that just created like a skirt around the west side, and let's see, the front and the west side. It's not at all on the other side. So it's really open, but yet it's protected from the hard north. The south side and the west side have fence. And so it provides exactly the little kind of cuddling protection that our seedlings get.
Yes. Do you ever have to protect from animals? Do you have any issues with things trying to eat your seedlings while they're hardening off?
Funny you should say that. We didn't used to, but now we do have a family of bunnies that have figured out that, let's just go right up on the concrete and take a look around. And so it just really depends, especially sunflowers are very vulnerable to rabbits. So we literally build a little kind of wall around our seedlings using, those are bulb crates that you see that our seedlings are sitting on, those black plastic crates. And that's what our bulbs came in for many years. So we have lots of them. And so we'll build a little wall around it, or we'll use row cover. We do whatever's necessary. So yes, and birds, cardinals are some of the worst, and so are wrens. I mean, we're big birders, and it was just so disappointing to me to watch a cardinal pull our sunflowers out to get the seed at the bottom. So sometimes, we have to, it just really depends on the time of year.
Yeah. So if you're wanting to be able to just take your seedlings outside and leave them there to harden off without having to bring them in and out each day, ideally, you're looking for a location like Lisa's carport that will give your seedlings protection from midday sun,
Yes,
rain if you're growing in soil blocks, wind, and animals if that's an issue for you. And if you don't have something like a carport protected structure, something you could experiment with is if you have a large tree or trees that provide some dappled shade on and off throughout the day, you might be able to move your trays there and leave them. Some people use shade cloth. Also, I've heard of some people putting a really open weave basket, or even like your crates, Lisa, they might be a good thing to turn upside down over
right.
a tray, and that provides a little protection from the sun.
Yeah, that is a good idea. And I have actually done that. So yeah, an upside down crate, I think they're 9 inches, the tallest ones. So you can use those for sure.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about some potential exceptions. So are there any exceptions to the hardening off rule? And under what circumstances might someone plant directly into the garden?
So the only time that I don't harden off, I don't want to say the only time I can think of that we have skipped hardening off is when we're planting cool season hardy annuals. And then once we're planting them, they're immediately being covered with lightweight row cover, which blocks the wind, blocks the sun, protects from varmints. And it's like if you were to crawl underneath there and lay for a minute, you would just realize what a toasty little spot that is. So you're actually providing that setup out in the garden, that protection. However, I would never do this with warm season because they would get overheated and get toasted. I mean, it just does not work quite the same as that. So cool season is the only time that we do it. And it really depends, the crazy weather, y'all, where it swings from. So Layne and I were just looking before we came on here. It is 72 degrees here today. And tomorrow it's going to be 31. I mean, that's not uncommon for us. So if we were planting cool season hardy annuals and it was 65 or 70 degrees outside and really sunny, I would never cover them because they get overheated. So I would have to harden them off on the carport. You know what I mean? So it's like, but if we're planting in November or December or January, where it's pretty reliably cool and cold most of the time, this is a great way to just go straight to the garden when you're providing that protection.
Yeah. And another question we get a lot too is, if I know it's going to be overcast for several days in a row, can I skip hardening off? So would you ever skip hardening off if you see that it's overcast weather coming for several days in a row? Would you ever take something straight from indoors and put it out into the garden?
Probably with cool season hardy annuals, I'd be hard pressed to do that with warm. I mean, I have killed more warm season transplants than probably some people have ever grown by doing stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, it'll be all right. It's supposed to be. And then you know how reliable the weather is. Not.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. The weather's kind of unpredictable, but overcast days are really great days to start
Yes.
your hardening off process, especially if you're doing that in and out. You can get away with more time outside if it's an overcast sort of day.
Yes, for sure.
All right, so now let's talk about temperatures. So, what temperatures should it be outside for hardening off cool and warm season plants? And an alternative way of putting that is, what temperatures are too low to leave seedlings outside? Because the cold temperatures are what really concern me when I have plants outside.
Sure. So good question, because I'm getting ready to like exercise this rule tomorrow
Yes.
when it goes down to 31 or 30 or whatever it's supposed to be. So again, it depends on warm or cool season. So let's talk cool season for a minute, because that's what I have a carport full of right now. So they're out there in trays, and plants are more vulnerable when they're not in the ground. Think about their little roots being in the whole, having the whole mass of soil to kind of be a little buffer for the roots. But when they're in a tray, they don't have that, so they're much more vulnerable. So as my general rule, if it's going to drop 32 or below and cool season plants are sitting out on the carport, generally I move them inside just for the night. It's like not during the day. That's not really that much of a problem. But I will also confess, I have definitely left them outdoors when it's gotten, high 20s, and most often they really do okay. But what I stand there like I did today, and Bobo and I decided, it's like, why would I not carry them in? Why risk stressing them when I've got room? And I don't put them under grow lights for overnight. I mean, we just bring them in and set them here in the workspace, and then I take them right back out the next morning. So probably freezing is my tipping point on that. And then on warm season tender annuals, there is no high, limits,
Yep.
but you don't want to put them outside. I mean, like basil will sustain damage. I think it's 52 degrees or 48 degrees or something. But they're the ones that show damage. But the rest of them, they might not show damage, but they are not happy. That just stresses them. It makes them susceptible. So I try not to put any warm season like what we're looking at. Those are trays of coxcomb and plumes. It's celosia. Celosia are heat lovers, right? So for me, nothing below 65 degrees typically, but again, that's personal preference. And if we've got a freight train of transplants here, I might push the envelope, but that's in the perfect world. If it's going down below 65 for warm season, they're brought back indoors.
So there's not really an upper limit on temperatures, but you do need to keep your eyes on the lows. That's where the damage is going to occur.
Yes.
All right. So should someone continue to water and fertilize as usual when they're hardening off their seedlings? And you touched on this a little bit before.
I've talked some about in the past about there's just so much manipulation that you can apply to seedlings. For instance, if you don't have beds prepared and your seedlings, you started too soon. I mean, I know a lot of us face this sometimes, right? You started too soon, your beds aren't ready, or it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights and you don't know how you're ever going to plant. All of those factors are rolling around in my head when I'm taking care of my seedlings. If the beds are ready and waiting, the temperature's looking favorable, I just continue to water and fertilize pretty normally. I go a little lighter on the watering just to kind of harden them up a little bit, toughen them up. I'm not quite as generous, but they are thoroughly watered. But if they're growing and weather conditions are not conducive to planting, I will cut the water even more, totally stop fertilizing, and it just slows the train down a little bit, so you can really, really manipulate that. But normally we feed once a week with seaweed fish, Neptune's Harvest, and our watering can when we water on Mondays. And so whether they get that or not depends on if they are so next week, we hope to be planting all these cool season hardy annuals. So I fertilize this week, and I will fertilize right when Bobo takes the tray to the, goes to take the tray to the field too, to give them one more little blast of goodness of food before they face a little stressful time getting transplanted.
Yeah. And you still do a once a day watering.
Yes. And I mean, I'm glad you said that, Layne. I always water every morning. You know what I mean? I have never, on an occasion, I've said, oh, something is still a little damp. I just won't water that today. Almost every time I've ever done that, when you come out the next morning, they're wilted because I'm not a
Yes.
helicopter seed starter, right? I see my seedlings once in the morning and then they don't see me again. So I
Yeah.
water every single morning.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about how long seedlings should be hardened off. So how long do you recommend seedlings be hardened off? And does that time period differ based on the time of year or the type of plant, whether they're warm season versus cool season?
Yes, for sure. Warm season versus cool season. Let's do cool season first. So I've spoken that if the weather conditions are conducive, mean if it's cool outside, and I can use hoops and row covers in the garden, lightweight row covers, we can pretty much bounce them straight from the grow room to the field if they're immediately hooped and covered, because it blocks
Yes.
wind and sun. And it also helps retain moisture because they aren't getting, dried out from the wind. But if that's not the case, and it is warmer conditions, like our classic fall here is it's still warm during the days and it's cool at night, those seedlings need to be hardened, go through the whole hardening off stage, which would be 7 to 10 days under my carport, for sure. And then for warm season tender annuals, 7 to 10 days is my golden rule. Like the slope, what we're looking at on the left here, those are warm season. Well, actually, both sides are warm. Those are celosias that are ready to go to the field that have been hardened off. And on the right, you can see those are eucalyptus down on the front right, and tomatoes. And then there's some cosmos. You can see the cosmos are quite immature. We obviously had to kick them outside because of other seedlings coming. But so when they hit their optimal size to go to the garden, they're already hardened off. So I kind of like growing my seedlings outdoors if if the conditions are conducive to that, but at a minimum of 7 to 10 days before they go out to face the open garden conditions.
Right. So a minimum of 7 to 10 days of hardening off is a good amount of time to aim for cool or warm season transplants.
Yeah.
Unless you're going the lightweight row cover route we discussed for cool season transplants. And more hardening off time is always better than too little.
Yes. And with cool, again, if it's the conditions, if it's cool and overcast, like Layne's talking about, no bright sunshine, then I would plant with less than 7 to 10, even with 0 days, if they're immediately being hooped and covered when they get to the garden under cool to cold conditions.
Yes. And I also agree with you. I love growing things straight outside after they've kind of germinated and gotten just a little bit of growth on them, as long as the temperatures out there are in their preferred range. But again, you do have to watch out for rain, which can destroy your blocks, or it can fill up your trays. And if you don't notice and you're not there to dump it out, they can quickly become really waterlogged. But if you're willing to watch those things, or if you have a protected area like Lisa, or if you're growing in plug trays, like we've mentioned, a great thing to do is to grow these outside.
I mean, we all want to be outside in the wind, the open, fresh air. You know what I mean? It's funny when I'm carrying my trays outside and I'm talking to them and saying, you are not going to believe how great it is outdoors. I mean, it's just so true. It's just the same reason we want to be outdoors, right? They are not meant to grow inside.
No.
And so, yeah, it's really, if the wet, especially once you start for warm season and it's warm outside, as soon as they're sprouted and coming up, if I have the space, popping them outside, those are the sturdiest seedlings we grow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So how do you know your seedlings are sufficiently hardened off and they're ready to be transplanted? Do you keep track of how long each tray has been hardened off out there? What's your method?
No, I mean, in general, most everybody moves out there when they're a little less height than what we like to plant. We don't keep track. I mean, with so many people here, moving them, watering them, changing them all around, it gets a little difficult to do that. So basically, if you're at your 3 to 5 inches tall, and I am the person that waters and does most of the seed moving, I kind of have that in my mind. But yeah, once they reach full size, you're pretty much out of here. That's why I like to get them out before they're full size, because I
Right.
can
So
count on that they've had their time.
you just use their size as a cue. And when they're full
Right.
size, they're ready to get planted out because you moved them out when they still had some growing left to do.
Yes.
And I tend to follow that protocol as well. But of course, you could opt to keep track some other way, like writing the date you started hardening off on some painter's tape or masking tape on your trays, if that works better for you. All right. And this was a question that someone submitted that they asked that we talk about. They said weather patterns are becoming more unpredictable and variable. And do you have any tips for hardening off when there are extreme temperature changes within the day or from day to day?
So yeah, I face that problem too. I mean, we just really have to kind of roll with the punches, right? And some of them are punches. So if you are growing cool season hardy annuals, I mean, you've got a wide window, right? From 32 or even 30 degrees up that you can leave them outside. But it's only if it's going to drop drastically below 30. Like if it's 34 degrees during the day and they aren't close, they're not going to do a lot of growing at that cold temperature, right? So we would have left our seedlings indoors where it's warmer to get them to do more vegetative growth. So if you put them outside when it's 34 degrees and it's going down to 28 at night, you're going to have to bring them back in at nighttime. I try to look at the weather and just really kind of do a good guess. It's like, well, I'm not really going to put you outside because the next 3 days are right on the edge of that number. And the warm season stuff, that variation that you need to bring them indoors shouldn't, if you wait until it's really warm enough to have them outside, hopefully that will, minimize any moving. But yeah, I move trays in and out all the time. I mean, I can remember the days where I thought to myself, is this my only job in life, is moving trays in and out? And that's just what it takes. If you don't have a protected spot, that's just what it takes.
Yeah. And if you are doing this professionally, it really can be worth it to invest in creating some sort of protected space like this. It's going to save you a lot of time in the long run.
Yep. And grow great transplants. I mean, that's, so true.
All right. Well, that was our episode for today. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe. And also, if you're listening in a podcast app, please leave us a review and rating. We really appreciate it. And over on YouTube, we love when you like and comment.
Yes. And y'all are liking this. You need to really let us know. Layne loves answering your questions. And so check that out. And remember, you can head over to thegardenersworkshop.com and connect with us. So friends, thank you so much, Layne. What a beautiful slideshow today. I love baby plants. I mean, I just love baby plants.
Me too.
And there's those little lettuce babies again.
I just love the colors. The colors are my favorite.
You know that Suzanne and I used to go to a show in Richmond that we did. I would speak and then we would sell our stuff, and a lot of other vendors were there. And it was always this time of the year. And there was a vendor there that would always have lettuce bowls for sale, containers that are full of those. I'm telling you, people got there extra early because it didn't matter how many he brought, he would sell out of them. And they were so beautiful with the red lettuce like you just showed and the green lettuce. So that is really, really beautiful. All right, friends, until we meet again. And don't forget, you will not miss anything if you subscribe to our channel or podcast. Till we meet again. Bye, Layne.
Bye.